I stared at the termination letter in my hands, the words blurring together as I sat in our kitchen. After 6 years with Morrison and Associates, they let me go with 2 weeks severance and a plastic smile. Budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal, they promised. But it felt personal when I watched my desk get cleared while my colleagues avoided eye contact. The front door slammed shut, and I quickly folded the letter, sliding it under a stack of mail. Thomas's footsteps echoed through our marble foyer. IMC, those expensive Italian leather shoes he bought last month, clicking against the floor like a countdown timer. Elena? His voice carried that familiar tone of someone who expected immediate attention. In here, I called back, forcing my voice to sound normal. Thomas appeared in the doorway, already loosening his silk tie. At 36, he still looked like the ambitious banker I married 8 years ago, but something had changed in his eyes over the years. The warmth I once saw there had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. "How was your day?" I asked, the question automatic after years of marriage. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of imported beer, and twisted off the cap with more force than necessary. The metal cap clattered across our granite countertop. "Thomas?" He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't anger or frustration, it was indifference. Complete, chilling indifference. "I heard about Morrison and Associates," he said, taking a long drink from his beer. "Word travels fast in the financial district." My heart stopped. "You heard?" "Layoffs hit them hard today. 15 people, including some senior staff." He leaned against the counter, studying me like I was a problem he needed to solve. "I assume you were one of them?" I nodded slowly, unsure why this conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Thomas set down his beer and crossed his arms. "Well, that changes things." "Changes what things?" "Our arrangement." He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. "For the past 8 years, we've split everything equally. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, everything. That worked when we both had incomes." I felt something cold creep up my spine. "Thomas, I'll find another job. This is just temporary." "No." The word cut through the air like a blade. "I've been thinking about this for a while, actually. Even before today. I make good money, Elena. More than good money. And I've been carrying more than my fair share lately." "Carrying more than your share?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "I've contributed equally to everything since we got married. Every single bill, every payment." "With what money?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your salary was decent, sure, but let's be honest about the numbers here. I make $180,000 a year. You made 65. I've been subsidizing our lifestyle for years." I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. This was the man who used to bring me flowers every Friday. The man who once told me that marriage meant being a team through everything. "So here's how it's going to work from now on," Thomas continued, his voice growing colder with each word. "We split everything 50-50. Exactly 50-50. I'll pay for my half of the mortgage, my half of the utilities, my half of the groceries. You figure out how to pay for yours." "Thomas, I just lost my job today. I need time to—" "That's not my problem." He picked up his beer again, taking another drink like this conversation was already over. "I'll only provide for myself from now on. If you can't contribute your half, then you'll need to make some adjustments." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of our expensive refrigerator, the one we'd bought together last year, splitting the cost exactly down the middle like we did everything else. Or like I thought we did everything else. I looked at this man I'd shared a bed with for 8 years, this man I'd built a life with, and realized I was looking at a stranger. The Thomas I married would have held me while I cried about losing my job. He would have assured me that we'd figure it out together. This Thomas was calculating the exact dollar amount of my worth to him. Something shifted inside me in that moment. Not anger. Anger would come later. Not sadness. That would come too. What I felt was clarity. Pure, crystalline clarity about exactly who I was married to. I could have argued. I could have cried. I could have begged him to remember the woman who'd supported his career, who'd moved across the country for his promotion, who'd given up opportunities for his dreams. Instead, I looked him directly in the eyes and nodded. "Okay," I said simply. Thomas blinked, clearly expecting a fight. "Okay? Okay." I stood up from the kitchen table, smoothing down my skirt. 50-50 it is. He stared at me for a long moment, confusion flickering across his face. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected, and I could see him trying to figure out what I was thinking. He had no idea what was coming next. Neither did I, but I was about to find out. The next morning, Thomas left for work at exactly 7:30, same as always. His routine never changed: shower, expensive cologne, perfectly pressed shirt, and that confident stride that said he owned the world. He kissed my forehead like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just turned our marriage into a business transaction the night before. "I'll be late tonight," he said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "Big client meeting?" I nodded from the kitchen table, sipping my coffee. "Of course." The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I moved. 8 years of marriage had taught me Thomas's schedule better than he knew it himself. He wouldn't be home until after 8, giving me nearly 12 hours to do what I needed to do. I started with our home office, the room Thomas considered his domain. He kept all our important papers there, filed away in his methodical system. Bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, everything organized by date and category. Thomas loved control, and controlling our finances had always been his way of maintaining it. But I wasn't the helpless wife he thought I was. Before Morrison and Associates, I'd worked in financial analysis for 3 years. I knew how to read between the lines of bank statements and spot irregularities that most people would miss. The first thing I noticed was our joint checking account. According to Thomas, we split everything 50-50, but the numbers told a different story. Over the past 6 months, there had been several large withdrawals I didn't remember making. 500 here, 800 there, always in cash. When I added them up, it came to over $4,000. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of every statement, every transaction, every document. My hands were steady, my mind focused. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about facts. The joint savings account showed similar patterns. Money going out that I hadn't authorized, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. But what really caught my attention was a small notation on one of the statements: an automatic transfer of $1,500 every month to an account ending in 7,394. I'd never seen that account number before. I dug deeper into Thomas's filing system, looking for anything with those numbers. Hidden behind our tax returns from 2 years ago, I found what I was looking for: statements for a personal savings account in Thomas's name only, an account I never knew existed. My breath caught in my throat as I looked at the balance: $87,412. $87,000 that Thomas had been hiding from me while lecturing me about carrying my fair share. I photographed every page, my anger building with each transaction. The automatic transfers from our joint account had been going on for over 2 years. Thomas had been systematically moving our shared money into his personal account while I contributed my entire paycheck to our joint expenses. But that wasn't the worst part. As I scrolled through the transactions, I saw charges that made my stomach turn. Expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together. Hotel charges in the city when Thomas claimed to be working late. Jewelry purchases from stores I'd never heard of. Jewelry I'd certainly never received. One charge stood out: a weekend at the Riverside Resort, the same weekend Thomas told me he was at a banking conference in Chicago. The charge was for a couples package, complete with spa treatments and champagne service. I sat back in Thomas's leather chair, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. My husband wasn't just financially manipulating me, he was cheating on me. And he was using our shared money to do it. My phone buzzed with a text message: "Thomas, hope you're having a productive day job hunting. Remember, rent is due in 2 weeks." I stared at the message, then at the bank statements showing his secret account with nearly $90,000. He was worried about me paying rent while sitting on enough money to cover our mortgage for 2 years. I kept digging. Credit card statements revealed more of the same pattern, and man, expensive purchases I never benefited from, charges at places I'd never been, a lifestyle Thomas was living without me. But the most damaging discovery came in a folder marked Investment Portfolio. Thomas had been telling me for years that we couldn't afford to invest more money, that we needed to be conservative with our savings. But here were statements showing he'd been making significant investments in his name only, using money from our joint accounts to fund his personal portfolio. The man who told me yesterday that he'd been subsidizing our lifestyle had actually been stealing from me for years. I photographed everything, creating a digital trail of evidence that painted a clear picture of financial fraud and infidelity. But I didn't stop there. I opened Thomas's laptop, knowing his password was the same combination he used for everything, our wedding date followed by his lucky number. His email revealed the final piece of the puzzle. Messages with someone named Amanda Foster, discussing not just their affair, but business dealings that sounded questionable at best. References to moving money around and keeping things off the books suggested Thomas's financial crimes extended beyond our marriage. By the time I heard Thomas's car in the driveway that evening, I had built a complete case against him. But I didn't confront him. Instead, I smiled and asked about his day, playing the role of the obedient wife while my mind worked on something he could never imagine. Thomas thought he held all the cards, but he was about to learn that I'd been studying the game much longer than he realized. The next morning, I told Thomas I was going to look for work. He barely looked up from his newspaper, just grunted something about finally taking responsibility. If he had bothered to watch me leave, he would have seen me drive in the opposite direction of the business district, toward the small house where I grew up. My mother's catering business operated out of a converted garage behind her home. Even at 9 in the morning, the smell of fresh bread and simmering sauces filled the air. Carmen Rodriguez had built Carmen's Kitchen from nothing 20 years ago, starting with birthday parties for neighbors and growing it into one of the most sought-after catering services in the city. "Mija," she called out when she saw me, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "You look terrible." I almost laughed. Trust my mother to cut straight to the truth. "Thanks, Mama. That's exactly what I needed to hear." She studied my face with those sharp brown eyes that had always seen too much. "Sit. Tell me what that husband of yours has done now." I hadn't planned to tell her everything, but sitting in her warm kitchen, surrounded by the smells of my childhood, the whole story poured out. The job loss, Thomas's cold ultimatum, and everything I'd discovered in his office. My mother listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, kneading dough with more force than necessary. "I never liked him," she finally said. "Mama, no, let me finish." She turned to face me, flour still dusting her hands. "From the first time you brought him home, something felt wrong. Too smooth, too charming. Men like that always have something to hide." I thought about all the times over the years when my mother had made subtle comments about Thomas, how he never helped with dishes when he visited, how he always steered conversations back to his job, his achievements, his plans, how he'd gradually convinced me to see my family less, claiming we were too busy with his career demands. "You saw it, didn't you?" I asked, even when I couldn't. A mother knows. She sat down across from me, reaching for my hands. "But you're not that naive girl anymore. What you did yesterday, gathering all that evidence, that was smart. That was my daughter using her brain. I don't know what to do with it all, though. I feel so stupid for not seeing it sooner." "Stop that." Her voice was firm. "You trusted your husband. That's not stupid. That's what marriage should be. He's the one who broke that trust." My mother got up and poured 2 cups of coffee, adding the extra sugar she knew I liked when I was stressed. "Tell me about this Amanda woman." From what I could tell from the emails, she works at his company. They've been seeing each other for at least 6 months, maybe longer. But it's not just an affair, they're involved in some kind of financial scheme together. "What kind of scheme?" I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the email screenshots I'd taken. They're moving money around, hiding transactions. Thomas mentioned something about client accounts and temporary borrowing. It sounds like they're stealing from his company. My mother read the messages, her frown deepening. "This is serious, Elena. This isn't just about your marriage anymore." "I know, but I don't know what to do about it. If I report him, it'll destroy his career, and despite everything, I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "Why?" The question was sharp. "After what he's done to you?" I struggled to find the words. "Because once I do this, there's no going back. Our marriage will be over. My life as I know it will be over." My mother reached across the table and took my hands again. "Mija, your marriage is already over. Thomas ended it yesterday when he showed you who he really is. The question is, are you going to let him destroy you, or are you going to fight back?" She was right, and we both knew it. But knowing something and accepting it were 2 different things. "I need time to think," I said. "You need a job," my mother corrected. And I need help with the Henderson wedding this weekend. 300 guests, full dinner service. You interested? I looked around the kitchen, remembering all the times I'd helped her as a teenager. Rolling dough, chopping vegetables, serving at events. It had been good work, honest work. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you independence. The pay is good, and I've got more contracts than I can handle. Plus, you know this business. You helped me build it. For the first time in days, I felt something other than anger or confusion. I felt hope. There's something else, my mother continued. My accountant is retiring next month. I need someone to take over the books, handle the business side. Someone I trust completely. Mama, I can't just... You can't what? Take control of your life? Build something for yourself instead of supporting a man who doesn't deserve you? I looked at this woman who had raised me alone after my father left, who had built a successful business through sheer determination and hard work. She was offering me more than a job. She was offering me a way forward. When do I start? I asked. My mother smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Right now, we've got prep work to do. Working in my mother's kitchen felt like stepping back in time, but in the best possible way. My hands remembered the rhythm of chopping vegetables, the precise timing needed for perfect sauces. More importantly, the work gave me something Thomas's money never could, a sense of purpose that belonged entirely to me. But even as I prepped for the Henderson wedding, my mind kept returning to those bank statements and emails. 3 days of working alongside my mother had given me clarity about what I needed to do next, but I had to be careful. Thomas was already suspicious about my calm reaction to his ultimatum. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop, pretending to job hunt while Thomas watched television in the living room. But I wasn't looking at employment websites. I was digging deeper into the financial records I'd photographed, and what I found made my blood run cold. The pattern went back much further than I'd initially realized. Thomas hadn't just been hiding money for 2 years. He'd been systematically draining our joint accounts for nearly 4 years. Every bonus I'd received, every tax refund, every gift from my mother for birthdays and holidays, it had all been quietly transferred to his personal accounts. But the emails with Amanda revealed something even worse. They weren't just having an affair and stealing from me. They were embezzling money from Thomas's company, using fake client accounts to funnel funds into their personal investments. One email thread made me physically sick. Asterisk Amanda. The Peterson account transfer went through. Another $15 Kelvins clean. Asterisk Thomas. Perfect. Elena has no idea about any of this. She's too trusting to question anything. Asterisk Amanda. What happens when she finds out? Asterisk Thomas. She won't. And even if she does, what's she going to do? She depends on me for everything. Asterisk. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking with rage. He'd been laughing about my trust, using it as a weapon against me while he stole from both me and his employer. The man I'd loved, the man I'd built a life with, saw me as nothing more than a convenient fool. The next email was even worse. Asterisk Thomas. I'm thinking of asking for a divorce anyway. Elena's becoming dead weight. With her job gone, she's just an expense now. Asterisk Amanda. What about the house, the assets? Asterisk Thomas. That's why I'm implementing the 50/50 rule now. By the time I file, I'll have documentation showing she couldn't contribute financially. No judge will give her half of anything. Asterisk. My vision blurred with tears of fury. Thomas hadn't just decided to abandon me after I lost my job. He'd been planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. The 50/50 ultimatum wasn't about fairness. It was about building a legal case to prove I was financially dependent so he could keep everything in the divorce. I screenshot every email, every bank statement, every piece of evidence. But I needed more than just proof of his betrayal. I needed to understand the full scope of his crimes. I spent the next hour researching the company accounts mentioned in the emails, cross-referencing them with Thomas's bank records. I began to see the pattern. Money would disappear from client accounts at his investment firm, get transferred through a series of shell companies, and eventually end up in accounts controlled by Thomas and Amanda. They'd stolen over $200,000. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How's the job hunting going?" I typed back, "Found something interesting. We'll call you tomorrow." Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway, beer in hand. Any luck with the job search? I looked up at him, this man who'd been systematically destroying my life while pretending to love me, and forced a smile. A few possibilities. Nothing concrete yet. Well, don't take too long. Like I said, I'm only covering my half of expenses now. He took a drink, studying my face. You're taking this whole thing pretty well. I thought you'd be more upset. What's the point of being upset? I kept my voice level, even though I wanted to scream. You made your position clear. I need to adapt. Something flickered in his eyes. Suspicion, maybe, or disappointment that I wasn't falling apart like he'd expected. Right. Well, good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. After he went to bed, I continued my research. I found the contact information for Thomas's company's internal audit department and their external compliance officer. I researched whistleblower protections and financial fraud reporting procedures. But most importantly, I started documenting everything with timestamps and detailed notes. If I was going to bring down Thomas and Amanda, I needed an airtight case. By 3 a.m, I had compiled a comprehensive file of evidence. Bank records showing the systematic theft from our joint accounts, email threads proving the affair and the embezzlement scheme, transaction records linking Thomas and Amanda to fraudulent client accounts. I had enough evidence to destroy Thomas's career, send him to prison, and ensure I got everything I deserved in the divorce. But I wasn't ready to use it yet. Thomas thought he was playing chess while I played checkers. He had no idea I'd been studying his moves for years, learning his patterns, understanding his weaknesses. Tomorrow, I would start building my own game. And when I was ready to make my move, Thomas would never see it coming. The hunter had become the hunted, and he didn't even know it. 2 weeks into my new routine, I had fallen into a perfect rhythm of deception. Every morning, I kissed Thomas goodbye and told him I was job hunting. Instead, I drove to my mother's catering business, where I was quickly becoming indispensable. The Henderson wedding had been a massive success, leading to 3 more bookings that month. But the real work happened in the evenings, after Thomas fell asleep. I had opened my own business checking account under the name ER Consulting Services, using my mother's address as the business location. Thomas never opened mail that wasn't addressed to him, so the bank statements would be safe. Within a week, I had landed my first client, a small restaurant chain that needed help organizing their financial records. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Thomas thought I was desperately searching for employment, I was building something that could make me more money than my old corporate job ever did. You look different, Thomas said one evening, studying me across the dinner table. More. I don't know. Relaxed? I shrugged, cutting into the chicken I'd prepared, a recipe I'd learned from my mother's catering menu. I guess I'm adjusting to the new normal. Good. I was worried you might do something dramatic, like most women do when they don't get their way. The casual cruelty in his voice made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. What would be the point? You made your decision. I have to live with it. Thomas smiled, the kind of satisfied smile that told me he thought he'd won. Exactly. I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly. If only he knew how clearly I was seeing everything. That night, after Thomas went to sleep, I made the call I'd been planning for days. Detective Patricia Wells worked financial crimes for the city police department. I'd found her name through my research into corporate fraud cases. Detective Wells? My name is Elena Rodriguez. I have information about a significant embezzlement scheme at Hartwell Investment Group. Her voice was crisp, professional. What kind of information? Bank records, email communications, and transaction histories showing systematic theft from client accounts. The amount stolen is over $200,000. There was a pause. Mrs. Rodriguez, are you an employee of Hartwell Investment Group? No, I'm married to one of the people involved in the scheme. Another pause, longer this time. I see. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Bring whatever evidence you have. I'll be there. The next morning, I told Thomas I had a promising job interview downtown. He barely looked up from his coffee, too absorbed in checking his phone, probably texting Amanda. Detective Wells was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that reminded me of my mother's. She listened without interruption as I laid out everything I'd discovered, spreading the printed emails and bank statements across her desk like pieces of a puzzle. This is comprehensive, she said finally. How long have you known about this? I discovered it 2 weeks ago, after my husband told me he would only pay for himself from now on. I started looking into our finances and found all of this. And you're certain these email communications are authentic? I nodded. I took the screenshots directly from his laptop. I can show you the metadata if you need it. Detective Wells studied the evidence for several minutes, making notes. Mrs. Rodriguez, I have to ask, what's your endgame here? This information will likely result in criminal charges against your husband. My endgame is justice. Thomas has been stealing from me for years, while making me believe we were partners. He's been planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. And he's been committing crimes with his girlfriend using money that should have been ours. You understand that once we begin this investigation, there's no going back? I understand. She nodded slowly. We'll need to move carefully. If your husband suspects he's under investigation, he might try to destroy evidence or flee. Can you continue gathering information without arousing suspicion? He thinks I'm a helpless housewife looking for work. He has no idea what I'm capable of. Detective Wells smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Good, here's what we're going to do. She outlined a plan that would allow me to continue monitoring Thomas's activities while the police built their case. I would document any new suspicious transactions or communications while they began their own investigation into Hartwell Investment Group's client accounts. One more thing, Detective Wells said, as I prepared to leave. You mentioned your husband is planning to divorce you. Have you considered protecting yourself legally? I'm working on it. That afternoon, I met with Rebecca Chen, a divorce attorney my mother had recommended. Rebecca specialized in high-asset divorces involving financial fraud, and her reputation for destroying cheating husbands was legendary. Based on what you've shown me, Rebecca said after reviewing my evidence, your husband has committed multiple felonies. The good news is, that gives us tremendous leverage in divorce proceedings. What kind of leverage? In cases involving financial fraud, the court can award the innocent spouse significantly more than 50% of marital assets. Given the systematic nature of his theft from your joint accounts, we could potentially claim the entire value of your home, his retirement accounts, and his investment portfolio. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely hopeful about my future. That evening, Thomas came home with flowers, cheap grocery store roses that probably cost him less than one of his expensive lunches with Amanda. What's the occasion? I asked. Just wanted to show you I appreciate how well you're handling everything. I smiled and put the flowers in water, thinking about how much those roses would cost him in the end. 3 weeks had passed since my meeting with Detective Wells, and Thomas was growing careless. Success had always made him arrogant, but now his confidence in controlling me had reached dangerous levels. He started bringing Amanda around more often, introducing her as a colleague when we ran into neighbors, letting her call the house at all hours. I played my part perfectly, the struggling dependent wife who was grateful for any scraps of attention he threw my way. Amanda's coming for dinner Friday, Thomas announced one evening, not asking but telling me. She's been working on a big project with me, and I thought it would be nice to have her over. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been pretending to browse job listings while actually managing my growing consulting business. Of course. What should I cook? Something simple. She's not really into fancy food. The casual disrespect in his voice made my jaw clench, but I nodded sweetly. I'll make something nice. What Thomas didn't know was that Detective Wells had asked me to encourage exactly this kind of meeting. The more comfortable Thomas and Amanda became around me, the more likely they were to slip up and reveal information about their crimes. Friday evening arrived, and Amanda Foster turned out to be exactly what I'd expected: blonde, ambitious, and completely convinced of her own cleverness. She walked into my home wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, treating me like I was the hired help. "Elena, right?" she said, barely glancing at me as Thomas took her coat. "Thomas has told me so much about you." I bet he had. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological torture. Amanda and Thomas discussed their work projects in code, making inside jokes and sharing meaningful looks across my dining room table. They talked about their recent business trip to Miami, the same weekend Thomas had told me he was visiting his sick aunt in Ohio. "The client meeting went so well," Amanda said, cutting into the salmon I'd prepared. "We should definitely pursue more opportunities like that." "Absolutely," Thomas agreed. "The returns have been better than expected." I served dessert and coffee, playing the perfect hostess while mentally recording every word for Detective Wells. But the real breakthrough came when Amanda excused herself to use the bathroom and left her phone on the table. Thomas immediately picked it up, scrolling through something with a frown. "The Peterson transfer is delayed," he muttered. "Problem?" I asked innocently. "Just work stuff. Nothing you'd understand." When Amanda returned, she seemed agitated. "We need to talk," she said to Thomas, glancing at me nervously. "Elena was just going to clean up," Thomas said dismissively. "Weren't you, honey?" I gathered the dishes and retreated to the kitchen, but I left the door slightly open. Their voices carried clearly as they moved to the living room. "The audit department is asking questions about the Peterson account," Amanda whispered urgently. "They want to see transaction records going back 6 months. "That's impossible. We covered our tracks." "Apparently not well enough." "Someone tipped them off." My heart raced. Detective Wells had warned me that the investigation was moving forward, but I hadn't expected it to progress this quickly. "Who would know enough to tip them off?" Thomas asked. "I don't know, but we need to move the remaining funds tonight, if they freeze the accounts." "How much time do we have?" "Maybe a week, if we're lucky. We need to transfer everything to the offshore accounts and then lay low for a while." I continued washing dishes, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. They were panicking, which meant they were about to make mistakes. "What about Elena?" Amanda asked. "If this goes public, she'll find out about everything." Thomas laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "Elena's not a problem. She's too dependent on me to cause trouble. Besides, she doesn't understand finance well enough to connect the dots." "Are you sure? She seems smarter than you give her credit for." "Trust me, I know my wife. She's harmless." After Amanda left, Thomas was unusually affectionate, probably feeling guilty about the conversation I wasn't supposed to have heard. He brought me wine and suggested we watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in months. "You know I love you, right?" he said as we sat on the couch. I looked at this man who had just spent the evening planning to steal more money while discussing how harmless and stupid I was, and I smiled. Of course I know that. Good, because no matter what happens with work or money, we're a team. Always I lied. That night, after Thomas fell asleep, I called Detective Wells and reported everything I'd overheard. She listened carefully, asking specific questions about the timeline and the offshore accounts. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "We're going to move fast now. Are you prepared for what comes next?" I looked at Thomas sleeping peacefully beside me, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. "I'm ready." "Good, because tomorrow everything changes." I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling, thinking about how Thomas had called me harmless just hours earlier. He was about to learn that the most dangerous people are often the ones you underestimate. The trap was set, and Thomas had walked right into it. The morning started like any other. Thomas showered, dressed in his expensive suit, and kissed my forehead before heading to what he thought would be just another day of stealing money and lying to his wife. He had no idea that Detective Wells and her team were already in position at Hartwell Investment Group, armed with search warrants and enough evidence to destroy him. I went through my usual routine of pretending to job hunt, but today felt different. Today, everything Thomas had built through lies and theft would come crashing down. The call came at 11:47 a.m. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Detective Wells." "It's done. We've arrested both your husband and Amanda Foster. The FBI is seizing all their accounts as we speak." I sat in my mother's kitchen, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the sound of her humming while she worked, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete relief. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you get your life back." Thomas called me from jail 3 hours later. His voice was shaking, all his arrogance stripped away by the reality of handcuffs and criminal charges. "Elena, you have to help me. This is all a misunderstanding. I need you to call my lawyer, post bail, something. Please." I let him talk for a full minute, listening to him beg and make promises he would never keep. When he finally stopped, I spoke calmly. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "Elena, I'm your husband. I don't have to do anything for you ever again, Thomas." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear his brain trying to process what I'd just said. "I know about everything," I continued. "The hidden bank accounts, the money you stole from our joint savings. Amanda. The embezzlement scheme, all of it. Elena, I can explain. You can explain it to the FBI and to the divorce court. Divorce court? His voice cracked. Elena, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but… You didn't make mistakes, Thomas. You made choices. You chose to steal from me for 4 years. You chose to cheat on me. You chose to plan a divorce that would leave me with nothing. And you chose to underestimate me. I could hear him breathing heavily, finally understanding that the harmless, dependent wife he'd been manipulating was gone. How did I figure it out? I'm not the stupid woman you thought you married. I have a degree in financial analysis, remember? The same degree you convinced me to waste in a corporate job while you built your criminal empire. Elena, please. I hung up. That evening, Rebecca Chen called with news that made me smile for the first time in weeks. The criminal charges work in our favor, she said. Since Thomas used marital assets to commit crimes, the court will likely award you the entire value of your home, his retirement accounts, and his legitimate investment portfolio. We're talking about roughly $400,000 in assets. And his debts? His legal fees and restitution payments are his problem, not yours. You'll walk away clean. 3 days later, I stood in the courthouse as Thomas was arraigned on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of his crimes. Amanda stood beside him, her designer confidence replaced by the pale fear of someone facing federal prison time. When Thomas saw me in the gallery, his eyes filled with something that might have been regret, but it was too late for regret. After the hearing, I drove to the house we'd shared for 8 years. It felt different now, not like a prison, but like a fresh start. I walked through each room, planning how I would redecorate, how I would make this space truly mine. My phone rang. It was my mother. How do you feel, Mija? I stood in the kitchen, where Thomas had delivered his cruel ultimatum just 6 weeks earlier, and I smiled. Free. Good, because I have news. The Riverside Hotel wants to hire us for their entire wedding season. 50 events, full catering service. We'll need to expand the business. We? You didn't think I was going to let you go back to working for someone else, did you? We're partners now. Equal partners. I looked out the window at the garden I'd planted, but never had time to enjoy while I was supporting Thomas's lies. Tomorrow, I would start tending it properly. Partners sounds perfect. 6 months later, Thomas was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Amanda got 6 years. I kept the house, the investments, and my dignity. But more importantly, I kept the lesson Thomas had inadvertently taught me. Never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. My consulting business was thriving, my partnership with my mother was stronger than ever, and for the first time in years, I was building a life that belonged entirely to me. Thomas had been right about one thing, everything was split 50-50 now. He got the consequences of his choices, and I got everything else. It was the fairest deal I'd ever made.